All right, good morning all to agents. This is Kevin Lauren. I'm the Director of Training and Marketing here and your digital Sherpa. And today we're going to be doing part 3 of our series on the new RPA from CAR. And of course, we're going to be joined again by Lauren Noack. So before we get into today's presentation with Lauren, I want to bring on Cameron Alley and Bill Seitz from Clearview Mortgage. Let me bring on Bill and I'll bring on Cameron. Good morning, Bill. How are you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
Fantastic.
All right.
And good morning, Cameron. How are you today, buddy?
I'm doing great, Kevin. Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday to
Feels
all.
like it was just Wednesday, but we're here again.
Groundhog's Day, right?
Yep.
Excellent. Well, we want to thank a lot of the agents for being on the webinar this morning. We have a couple of new agents that we'd like to join us, and so it's just great to have all these new agents and of course all of our regulars learning about how we can further our business, and in this case how we can understand the new RPA. So welcome all agents, glad to have you here. So Bill, what's going on in mortgage land today?
Well, I'm going to let Cameron kind of take that update, but I just wanted to add real quick. I know we've been getting a lot of referrals, Kevin, from some of our agents that have been with us for a while. And so we just want to thank everybody that's reached out and, and passed a name along or someone in the, in the real estate world. And if there's somebody that you do have that's looking to make a move, we'd love to talk to you, and also, talk to Tim or Don Kearney, our two recruiters. And so we appreciate all the, the referrals and just growing organically. It means a lot. And so I just want to say thank you to those agents that have done that, and don't be afraid to pass those names along if they're out there.
Absolutely. You probably know a few other agents that are out there that would be a good fit for our group. So we'd love to have them join us, of course.
Let Cameron take away the update, though. I know he's got some good information to share.
Yep.
Right,
Yep.
cool.
So today I basically I don't know if you guys know this, but every week they release new mortgage index numbers, which is really high quality information for all your realtors, kind of seeing what the market's doing. But you can basically just Google that and get those numbers, or you can just tune into the webinar and we will obviously provide all that information for you every week. So very nice. But today was one of the first days since basically the 9th that we finally got a little bit of an improvement on rates. It's been going up pretty quickly due to inflation numbers and like retail numbers coming out, and all the Fed talks of them saying that they're going to slowly increase rates. But that being said, it's been very volatile, kind of up and down. So who knows, next week we could be back down to the 1.4s, but we'll just hold our breath and see what kind of happens with that. But good news, it did get a little bit better today. And as far as those mortgage index numbers, very interesting stuff here. So obviously with mortgage rates rising, refi applications have been kind of slowing down. And right now, the average contract interest rate for a 30-year purchase loan is 3.2. So that's a pretty dramatic increase from about a week ago. So we're right around where we were 3 weeks ago. But that being said, with the average rate being 3.2 on a 5% purchase with Clearview, we're still at 2.99%. So we're literally, about a quarter better than the average. And our mortgage insurance, which obviously can be very high with a lot of different retail lenders, with a 5% down, it's right around $100 a month. So that's very good. At 10% down, it's only about $60 a month. So what that means to you guys, obviously, is that more of your clients that are kind of on the edge of qualifying would qualify with us, because their payment's going to be anywhere from, $50 to $200 cheaper, depending on who that other lender might be. So that's very powerful. A lot of times we have people that don't qualify because of $40 a month, so it's important every single dollar is really important. So as I said, those refinance applications kind of slowed down, but the purchase index rose 2% for the 6th week in a row. So what that means is that more people are applying for purchase loans as refis slow down. And it's also the fall, which is pretty unprecedented. Usually it slows down a little bit. But that's for both conventional and government loan segments. Purchase applications have continued to increase. So that shows that the market is still extremely hot, even with the increased purchase prices and the increased rates. I think that's really due to kind of these unprecedented times where companies are allowing people to work at home permanently. And then on another note, you've got a massive amount of people waiting for prices to soften too. So, I think for literally years to come, we've got a really solid purchase market ahead of us. And even with rates going up, the highest forecast that we're really seeing as far as what the Fed is saying, it's like mid threes for purchase rates. So, that's still very historically low. We didn't even really have rates like that until the housing market crash of 08 ever. So, if they're not in the twos and they're in the threes, we can't complain too much. It's still going to let a lot of people, no matter their income, be involved in the housing market. So, overall, those mortgage index, like I said, you can always look it up and do some research yourself on that, because it's really powerful stuff to speak about with your clients. But obviously, every Wednesday we try to fill you in on that. And then last but not least, obviously, every week we kind of get our mortgage wins that our account executive at UWM sends over to us. So we're going to try and share this with you every week so that you can see, these same day approvals, these purchase loans, 8 days, 11 days closing. And I'm assuming that those probably had appraisals too. And then we got a refi there closing in 7 days as well. So we've got a good team over here at Clearview. Doesn't matter who you reach out to, we're going to take care of you. We're going to take care of your clients. And first and foremost, we're going to make sure that you get that loan closed as fast as possible and get a great product. So I think that's pretty much all for today, unless Bill has anything to add. But like I said, make sure to tune in every Wednesday so we can give you a nice update and you can use that as knowledge for your clients.
Excellent stuff, Cameron, as always. You always knock it out of the park. Kevin had put up Cameron's website there. If you need to reach out to Cameron for anything, just make sure you can go to his website. It's CameronAlley.com. You can also find him on the Clearview website as well for our company homepage. And then lastly, we are working on some co-branding stuff. We didn't quite get it to the finish line for this week, but I know we'll have it ready next week, and we'll share that with you all. Some really nice flyer pieces and marketing material that we can co-brand with you guys. So we're excited to roll that out.
For sure. Courtney, unfortunately, has been under the weather. She's got it all pretty much dialed in, but not ready for prime time. So I gave her a couple of extra days. Poor thing. All right, perfect. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate the update as always. So now I'd like to bring Lauren Noack, our TC and our compliance coordinator, on the line. Good morning. How are you today, Lauren?
I'm well, thank you. Glad to be back.
Heck yeah. Always a pleasure to have you come and share your knowledge with us about this brand new RPA, which we've been learning a lot about. So today is going to be our third installment. And today, if I'm not wrong, we're going to be discussing due dates and timeframes.
Correct. Yes. We are going into more detail now about some of the logistics as far as how to really navigate this new contract. And so, I'll jump right in if we're all ready.
We are ready. And let me just double check that we have any. Okay, making sure everything's okay on our end. We're looking good. So remember, we do have a chat feature. So if you do have questions, don't hesitate to put those in the chat and we'll try to get to them as soon as we can. All right, away you go, Lauren.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Okay, so this is the third installment of going into this new contract that's coming out. If you haven't yet, I recommend you going back and viewing the previous two webinars that have been reposted. There's a lot of valuable information. And then as we go through each of these, again, we're going to be referencing and going back to some of the items touched upon in the previous webinars.
Yeah, and real quick, Lauren, just again, of course, those webinars have been emailed to everybody, but if for some reason you can't find the email, you can always go to our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube and do a search for Alta Realty Group, and you can see all of our training videos, and you can find each of the ones that we've been doing for the last couple of weeks. So that's the best way to go if you don't know where to find them.
Yes, great resource. And, you know, it talks about, you guys have awesome topics all the time. So there's a lot of great information on there. So a little bit about me, for those that are new or don't remember, I've been in real estate since 2009. I'm the owner operator of the TC Advantage, and I started that company in 2013. Since then, my team and I have closed over 2,500 transactions. Year to date, we've closed a little over 450. I have my real estate license. I don't practice real estate, but I do use my license in order to get access to the education through CAR. And it also allows me to then become a CAR certified transaction coordinator and also a CAR certified forms trainer. More information about our TC services is available there on the website. So that's a little bit about how I have the authority to talk on the topic today. And then as far as today's agenda goes, we're going to be, again, kind of all over the place within the contract. Even though the topic is really due dates and timeframes, we're going to spend a majority of time on definitions and specifics of words. And then we're going to go through and look at some of the default timeframes in the contract. And then I also created some calendar layouts to help as well. And that will really kind of help avoid having to take off our shoes and socks and figure out some of these calculations for all the dates and the timeframes. So again, since we're going to be bouncing around the contract a little bit and reading some of the more fine print, it's a really good idea to make sure that you have a copy to reference, whether it's a digital copy. I like to print out a copy just to have it so I can highlight it and make notes and that sort of a thing. So in order to get to that, you're going to want to navigate to car.org. And then on the top section of the website, you'll click on Transaction Center along that top bar there. And then you're going to click on Standard Forms. And I think at that point, or maybe once you click on Transaction Center, it might ask you to log in if you haven't already. And then when you click on Standard Forms, it will take you to this screen where you'll click on Forms Revisions and New Form Releases. And you'll click on that. And then that will take you to, this is a great reference for traditionally new documents. Our new and revised documents are released through CAR every June and December. And this is a spot where you can preview what they're planning to release. You can also go back, I think it goes back as long as they've been doing these updates, and view a summary of what's been updated, what forms are getting changed. So it's a great spot to get familiar with. But this is where you'll also see a link to that RPA draft. And because CAR loves to be redundant, you then click again on another link that says, click here to view the RPA draft. But the reason for that too is that they also have a link to sign up for some of the classes. And these are classes taught through CAR by someone on their legal team. And I think the next one is December 1st. There is a cost associated with it. I think it's $75 for members. And it's a 4-hour course that goes over this new contract that will be released in December. But keep in mind that those 4 hours that you spend count towards your continuing education credits as well. So their slide presentations aren't as cute or as fun, but that's up to you how you want to spend your time.
For sure. You don't get that. You don't get this level of service from CAR.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think this is my favorite part of these presentations is figuring out new ways to deliver them. So, so now before we start trying to figure out dates and how to calculate them, we're going to need to get really familiar with some of these definitions. Every due date and time frame in the contract is associated with some sort of action, and the contract has a whole section that defines these terms. So section 25 of the contract It starts on the very bottom of page 12. I don't know if when they release the final copy, if it'll reformat it to be at the top, but to the very bottom of page 12 and then continues on to page 13 in the contract. And the first sentence in section 25 says the following words are defined terms in this agreement. They shall be indicated by initial capital letters throughout this agreement and have the following meaning whenever used. So that is important to note because capital letters, as we all know, are typically reserved for your proper nouns, but in the contract, you can easily notice what words have explicit definitions just by the fact that they start with a capital letter. So that's important to keep in mind. We'll see throughout the contract things that the same word that is or is not capitalized. So the first word to be defined in section 25 is one that's tied to a majority of due dates and timeframes in the contract, and that's acceptance. So acceptance means the time the offer or final offer is fully executed in writing by the recipient party and is delivered to the offering party or that party's authorized agent. So what does that mean? Okay, so first off, it means now there's no longer a need for the confirmation of acceptance section on the last page of the contract or in the counter offers. People weren't using it correctly anyway. It wasn't required to make the contract binding, so no more. So we like that. Now, in its most basic form, if we just have the purchase agreement that's going to be accepted, the seller would be the recipient party, right? Because they're receiving the offer. So the seller, by this definition, needs to fully execute the offer, then deliver it to the offering party, which in this case would be the buyer because they're making the offer, or their authorized agent. And authorized agent in this definition is capitalized. So of course, that also means that's defined. In the contract, it means the broker or the individual licensee for that broker. So now if you expand that scenario to then include a counteroffer, right? Now your roles are going to be reversed and the buyer would be the recipient party because they received the counteroffer, and the seller becomes the offering party because they're providing this counter offer. So notice that it also references the offer or final counter offer, and that is written into that definition. So can you have an accepted contract? Can you have official acceptance if the counter offer is fully executed, but the purchase agreement, the RPA, hasn't been signed by the seller yet? And according to this definition, yes, you can. This is when the clock starts, when the final counteroffer, when the offer or the final counteroffer is signed and then delivered back to the other party. So another important thing to note about this definition is that the word delivered is also capitalized. And so that leads us to our next definition, which is deliver, delivered, or delivery. So now this definition is typically tied to contingencies, right? Things that are being passed from one party to another that require review or some sort of further action, whether it be contingency removal, signatures, or cancellation if needed, that sort of thing. So this basically says that documents, unless otherwise agreed, are considered delivered upon personal receipt of the document by the buyer, the seller, or their authorized agent, whoever it's being sent to. So it seems simple. It's kind of obvious, one would say. If you have them, then they've been delivered. But because this word holds so much leverage for both parties, the longer you look at it, the more you start to see how it can kind of be maybe pushed or pulled to benefit one side or the other. So because of that, the definition then gets more detailed. It's not just that one sentence, it goes on. One of the capitalized elements in this definition is where it says otherwise agreed. And that is capitalized, so that is also defined. And that definition is that both parties agree in writing and the form is delivered to each party. So something like the DNA form, the delivery of notices addendum. And so this basically is a form. It's not often used, but I think as we get into this, you'll see how something like that might be more important, and something to get sort of familiar with. An example of that scenario, I've seen agents will sometimes go on vacation, and everybody knows as soon as you're about to go on vacation, that's when all the business starts pouring in and you get super busy and everybody contacts you and you open a bunch of escrows. So when that happens, you want to make sure that you might use something like this delivery of notices addendum, which would then let the other side know, hey, you are now allowed or authorized to deliver things that need to be delivered to this specific party, this specific email address. And it would allow maybe another agent, if they're covering for you, maybe if that you go out of the country or something like that, or your time frames are different, you don't have a bunch of access. Maybe sometimes there's a scenario where the agent on the other side knows that you're going out of town, and maybe that there's a time change or that you're traveling on a certain day. And so they're going to send a notice to perform. Well, because this definition of delivered, or delivery is talking about personal receipt, the agent might say, well, I emailed it to you. I'm sorry that you were on a plane all day long, right? So you might need something like this to be able to document alternative forms of delivery so that you don't get kind of caught in a loophole like that. Another term in this definition that's capitalized and thus also defined is, like I mentioned before, that authorized agent. And that just, again, says the individual licensee from the real estate broker, the actual real estate broker, or whoever is written or documented in the real estate broker section of this contract, which is page 16. And you might remember from the first webinar, I really harped on the importance of this final page, and this is specifically why. The CAR attorneys that I spoke with felt that section or that page was going to be the most commonly missed, or the section that is going to cause kind of the most issues. And this is that particular reason, because you need to make sure that the people that are listed on page 16, that's who is going to be considered in receipt when things are delivered. Does this make sense so far?
Absolutely.
Okay, so now we're going to go further into this definition, right? And so when it says, okay, it's considered effective upon personal receipt. Okay, well, what is personal receipt? What does that mean? The definition goes in further. It means a copy of the document, or, and this is a newer part that's been added to the contract, or via link. So they're now writing into the contract that documents can be delivered via link. And that, so personal receipt is when a copy of this document or the link is in possession, regardless of delivery, or so whether it was sent via text or via email, or regardless of the delivery, that it was sent, and that it was sent to the other side and that it's been received, or that an electronic copy is sent to the designated electronic delivery address on page 16 of the contract. So again, there's a specific section on page 16 that outlines where you can list the electronic copy delivery addresses. So what if, so now there's this, it goes further into define the link, right? It can be a Google Drive link, or a Dropbox link, something like that. This is CAR's version of like getting with the times. And so it outlines kind of what they mean by a link. But what if you or your client have trouble opening the link? Maybe the client flat out refuses. They're like, I don't want to deal with getting all of my documents delivered via link. This is where the revised version of the CAR form, the RFR, or the receipt for reports, comes in. So this copy here is the updated receipt for reports, and you'll see that right down the middle of of the form, there's now a column of checkboxes where you can designate if these reports were delivered via link. And it's actually a lot more common than you think to have documents or reports delivered via link. And remember, the reports, it's not just home inspection report, termite report, right? This can be leases, HOA documents, as well as some of the disclosures. Those are all listed on this receipt for reports. But typically the links get used when the file size is an issue. And I know a lot of home inspection companies, they send their reports over via link because those are usually really huge file sizes. And in my own experience as a TC, we've attached documents that then get automatically converted into a Google link just because the size is so large. And then we have to go back and forth and play the game with the other side saying, oh, well, nothing was attached. And it's like, well, I know because I said it was attached, but it's attached in a link and you just click the link, and it's a whole back and forth. So this process is outlined and defined in the contract to kind of remedy that back and forth. And it does that by now giving the other party, the in this case, the buyer, 3 days to put in writing that they don't want to receive whatever's being delivered via link. So the section 6 on this receipt for reports outlines that. And the contract says in this definition that they have 3 days after receipt of something being sent via link to say that they are unable to or just unwilling to open the link.
And quick question, Lauren, do you have to have like a confirmation or like a read receipt?
Nope.
Nope. Okay.
Nope.
Yeah.
And
Albert,
really,
yeah, Albert had that quick question. So
yeah.
no, Albert, I guess you do not need to have that. You just need to verify that it left your outbox. Is that all you need?
Well, really, because I asked CAR attorneys that specific question because,
Yeah.
you know, as the TC, we're all about documentation. I need to know, you know, confirm my confirmation.
Yeah.
And the CAR Legal's attorney was like, you know, our thought process really is, and I've mentioned this in previous webinars, agents really are super on top of their inbox and their text messages when they're waiting for offers to get delivered. And then all of a sudden, when it's the other way around, it's like, oh, I can't open my email, or, you know, I no longer have, I'm not able to check it. And it's like, well, if you were waiting for for a contract or something like that, you know, so the technology is such that if this were to go to court and, you know, then you have that sort of documentation, and it would be on the other party to say, well, look, this shows this Gmail receipt that this was sent from the outbox at this time. And you're telling me that nowhere in your email, you know, there's no record or documentation. So,
I can't see it going that far, but
yeah, exactly.
And then another quick question, Lauren. Joyce Bizarro asked, would this form be attached to the offer or would it be later?
This specific form would be for documents in addition to the purchase agreement. So it wouldn't be for purposes of the sending the purchase agreement via link, which is kind of where I was going in this description, because you'll see this receipt for reports is only available for the buyer to sign. And so it's helpful in regards to seller delivering to the buyer reports, maybe HOA documents, lease documents, disclosures, things that are provided by the seller. But it's not the only method, because the contract in the definition just says recipient shall notify the sender in writing. So if this is the other way around, right, where maybe we've all sometimes been in receipt of offers where they're huge file sizes, and maybe an offer comes over as a link or something like that. The terms of the contract are only in effect upon execution of the agreement. So it doesn't really apply to the offer being made, if that makes sense. It's once you have this signed agreement, then the terms of that agreement go into effect.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And
Yeah.
Also real quick, Albert also just mentions, what a great idea to just follow with a phone call. Did you get the email? Right?
Yes.
Make sure, do some, proactive steps to not be in limbo and to avoid these things. Great call,
Yep.
Albert.
Exactly.
Communication. It's everything in these transactions.
Right? It won't kill you, I swear.
Right. Pick up a phone.
So if the notification is sent, right? So when it talks about the recipient shall notify the seller or the sender in writing, that allows for the tables to be reversed. It's not always seller delivering to buyer, right? It could be buyer sending to seller. And if the other party is unable or unwilling to access this via link, they just need to notify the sender in writing. And that could be an email, that can be a text message. So those, as long as it's within those 3 days of delivery, then the other party will have to sort of regroup and send out the items no longer as a link, right? So if the seller isn't, or this, if the, I keep saying seller, words matter. So I'm going to try and be very specific. If the sender is not notified within the 3 days from delivery, then it's deemed that the recipient is okay to receive items via those items via link, and that they were able to open those items via link. So those 3 days after delivery of things are important to keep in mind.
Again, just a quick text, even like, hey, did you get it? Were you able to open it? Are you able to access it? Doesn't take long.
Super important for things like notices to perform or demands to close. This is where you start to get the excuses of like, oh, I saw you sent it, but then I tried to send it to my client to sign it and like they couldn't open it. And I think it's a bad link and, we didn't get it. And so this is like, look, if you don't tell me that within those 3 days after I've sent it to you, then too bad, so sad. Okay. The other definition that gets referenced a lot is that anywhere where the contract mentions day or days, this means calendar days. So the only time that that's different is in regards specifically to the delivery of deposit to escrow. So in that case, the default in the contract is that those are referenced in business days. So the contract defaults, you have 3 business days after acceptance to deliver the deposit to escrow. Anywhere else where it talks about days, those are just calendar days. You can make that number any day you want for the deposit, but it will always be calculated in business days. Everything else is calendar. So now we go, this is where we kind of get into the minutia and the need on the next slide for an actual calendar to kind of try and figure out how these specific dates are calculated. There's a whole section I, or I guess item I in section 25 of the contract that is going to break down how to count days in the contract. And so it's broken down kind of into 6 parts. First part, it says the first day after an event is the first full calendar date following that event and ending at 11:59 p.m. So sometimes the event will typically be acceptance, right? That's sort of the gauge for a lot of following due dates. So something is due blank days after acceptance. And so acceptance would be considered the event. Another option for what might be an event would be delivery. So buyer has to remove their contingency, or they have to return their escrow instructions 5 days after they were delivered. And so delivery would be the event. And so that does not count as the first day. So acceptance is not the first day. This is saying the first day is that following day that goes from, all the way up until 11:59 p.m. The second part of counting days is that all calendar days are counted in establishing the first day after an event. So if the event is acceptance and you have a contract that's accepted on Christmas Eve on December 24th, then the first day after acceptance would be Christmas. That would be day one. So even though it's a holiday escrow's not open, it's still counted because it's a calendar day. So that would be day one. And then the third part gets into differentiation between scheduled performance day and an allowable performance day. This is new in the contract. Remember, the reason we're jumping from a 10-page contract to a 16-page contract is because they really tried to break down and make sections of the contract smaller and more digestible. And in doing so, they needed to sometimes expand some of those definitions to really get specific. And so for scheduled performance days, all calendar days are counted in determining the date upon which performance must be completed, ending at 11:59 p.m. on the last day for performance. And this is considered the scheduled performance day. And I'll get into sort of the details between the two here in a second. Now, after acceptance, if the scheduled performance day for any act required by this agreement, including the close of escrow date, lands on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, the performing party shall be allowed to perform on the next day that is not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, ends at 11:59 p.m. And that's called the allowable performance day. So let me give you an example here. So here we see acceptance of contract. This is the event acceptance is on the 1st of December. So that's day 0. And if we're looking for when the deposit is due, right? Remember, that's referenced in business days. So we'll go by all the defaults in the contract here. Default 3 business days. So day 1 is Thursday the 2nd. Day 2 is Friday. Day 3 is Monday. And the definition for that day goes up to 11:59 p.m. So the buyer has until 11:59 p.m. on the 6th to deliver their deposit to escrow, because those are calculated in business days. Obviously, they're going to have to do it before 11:59 p.m. because escrow's not open that late. But anyway, okay, so now let's say there's a contingency removal. And again, the default in the contract is 17 days after acceptance. So the date of the event, AKA acceptance, is on the 1st. So now we count all of the calendar days, starting with the first full day after acceptance. So that includes Saturday and Sunday. Those dates count when we are counting all the calendar days. So that takes us up to the 18th. So 17 days after acceptance, the scheduled performance day for contingency removal is Saturday the 18th. But the contract says it allows for this date for performance to be moved to the next day that is not a weekend or legal holiday, right? So you're not going to move it to Sunday because that's still a weekend or a legal holiday. So now that means that even though day 17 is on Saturday, the buyer has until 11:59 p.m. on Monday to perform and remove that contingency. So when it comes to the counting days, the 5th element of this, best movie ever, by the way. Anyway, when it comes to close of escrow date, it says that any day that the recorder's office in the properties county is closed, the close of escrow date will occur the next day the recorder's office is open. So this is now another layer on top of that, right? Where a perfect example of this is the day after Thanksgiving. So it's not technically a legal holiday, although I firmly believe that it should be. However, a buyer could still be required to remove a contingency or perform on that date, right? Because it's not a weekend and it's not a legal holiday, it's a Friday. But there are some, not all, county recorders offices that are closed. So when it comes to the contingency removal, the buyer could be required to perform on that Friday. But if that county recorder's office is closed, they can't close escrow on that day. That would then get pushed out to the following Monday. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Really,
and it really should be a holiday. What the heck? Come
I
on.
know, right?
my family's Catholic. We celebrate, pretty much the whole, 24th is massive for us. So
Right?
I'm
Yeah.
not working that day.
And especially for people that have spent Thanksgiving in the kitchen cooking, it's
Totally.
the day to sit on the couch with your tubs of leftovers and not move. So
There you have it.
best day. So sometimes, it really helps to just pull out a calendar and count these days. And the section in the contract really kind of breaks down how to do it. But it's important to know that it may affect different points of the contract differently, on when these days land and what the scheduled day is versus the allowable day. And then finally, when you're counting days for seller possession, the close of escrow date, now that is considered the date of the event. So that's considered day 0. So when you're talking about possession is 5 days after close of escrow, day 1 would be the first full day after escrow closes. So anybody have any questions about these definitions before we move on?
I don't see any in the chat. We're good.
Okay. I really recommend going through this definitions section of the contract, because there are a ton of details in there. I mean, it talks about what does repairs mean. There's a section, section D it defines as is. And so that might, again, we've talked previously, being really helpful to a client that is like, I want you to rewrite in the counteroffer or say, make sure the seller knows that this is as is. So rewrite that part, which is not recommended by CAR Legal at all. And so this is a section where you can point them to see, what does this include? How is that defined? It defines electronic copy and electronic signature, and that sort of a thing. So check it out. It's really helpful and informative. Okay. So there's a ton of stuff to look on here. I thought, well, if I use less slides, maybe it won't be as long. And I think I was just kidding myself. So these are all of the default timeframes within the contract. I hope I got them all. Should be all of them. Most of these are going to be in the grid, and most of them can be adjusted, right? So anything that is negotiable or any term that can be changed is going to be found in the grid, which is the first 3 pages of the contract, section 3. There are some throughout the contract that are static, and these are the dates that they are. And those are listed at the end. I made them in that red color. So the biggest change to note here is now the default timeframes for all your contingencies is 17 days. So loan is back to 17 days. It's no longer 21 days as the default. Everything is down the line 17 days. And again, I've mentioned before, there are more than just 3 contingencies. So you have your loan appraisal, your investigation, not the access to property, because that's not a contingency, but reviewing the seller documents. And that can mean not just disclosures, that can mean tenant lease agreements, that can be reports that they send over, reviewing the title report, receiving and reviewing HOA documents, reviewing and receiving any leased or lien items, so like solar leases or things like that. Those are all default 17 days across the board. The other item, the one that's up there on the top right with an asterisk, those have a default time frame called out in the grid, but in the contract, and further into the paragraph of the RPA, they also have additional allowances for things like late delivery. So for example, the seller's requirement is to deliver documents to the buyer within 7 days of acceptance. That's the default time frame written into the grid. However, if you go further into the contract, that to the paragraph referenced in the grid, which is 14B3, we see that if the items the seller's responsible for delivering are not delivered within those 7 days, then the buyer has 5 days after delivery of those items, or, and this is where I just have to go slow, and I recommend that everybody really reads this. Okay, so if the items are not delivered within the 7 days, the buyer has 5 days after delivery of the items, or the time referenced back into the grid for 34L or 3L4, which is the that contingency section for reviewing those seller documents, whichever is later. Okay, so let me try and make this a little bit more digestible. Let's say that the seller delivers documents on day 8, right? But the buyer has, let's see, 14 days to review the seller document, or we'll just say the 17 days, right? So we'll stay with the defaults. Let's say that the seller delivers the documents, not within the 7 days, but on day 8, right? So now it says, okay, well, now the buyer has 5 days after delivery, or those 17 days, whichever is later, right? And so they still, because the 17 days gives them more time. So let me see, the 17 minus 8 is 9. So they have 9 days until they get to that final day 17. And so the 5 days doesn't count. It doesn't mean that they get 17 days plus 5, right? They either get 5 days or 9 days, whichever is later. Sorry about that.
No worries. And then quick question from Albert. Could the final walkthrough be 2 to 3 days before the closing? I say yes, right?
Yes, because it's in the grid. So you can make that whatever the default time frame is. But it should be, ideally you want to give them enough time to make that any changes or corrective action. So usually it's a good idea to do it as early as possible, but it gives them, it really gives the seller a parameter for when those repairs need to be done. So you can shorten it if you want to, but that's the minimum, the default in the contract.
Got it.
Okay, so now also remember the default for when an increased deposit is due is now, the default is now after all the contingencies have been removed. So that's typically not, I mean, in my experience, usually the increased deposit comes maybe like after the inspection contingency. But so it's important to note that it says after full contingency removal. So keep that in mind. Another thing to note is at the very bottom on the left, the default for time of possession is now upon notice of recordation. You can specify a time or a date if you prefer. The current contract has the default time at 6 p.m. But now it's just like, look, whenever we get confirmation of recording, that's when you have possession. If the seller is remaining in possession after closing, you would utilize the forms SIP, seller in possession, or the RLAS, residential lease after sale. And both of those forms give time of possession at 6 p.m. because obviously it can't be upon notice of recordation if it's already recorded days prior. Any questions about any other questions about these default timeframes? Okay.
We're clear so far.
I just wanted to kind of wrap up with a breakdown of this notice to perform and demand to close element. because the best way to think of utilizing these two elements in the contract is to think of it as the notice to perform is used if there's still a contingency in place. Once all the contingencies have been removed, typically the only action left is the only action left to perform is to close escrow. And so that's where then you would use the demand to close. And that comes in once all contingencies have been removed and all you need to do is close. So for this part of the contract in these two terms, this is where we kind of see all the elements that we've discussed previously come together and come into play. So this is what I mean by that. Let's assume we have a quick 10-day escrow and it's all cash. So we have a 5-day contingency removal for all the contingencies to be removed. And we have acceptance is on Wednesday the 8th. Oh, let me just jump back here real quick. Okay, so notice to perform, the terms in delivery and how the notice to perform is written out in the contract is that one, it has to be in writing. So either a notice to buyer to perform or a notice to seller to perform. Two, it has to be obviously signed by whomever is delivering it. It has to give the other party at least, whoops, I spelled that wrong, at least 2 days after delivery or the time specified in the paragraph on that notice to perform, whichever occurs last. And again, we'll go through this on the calendar. Also, it cannot be delivered any earlier than 2 days prior to the scheduled performance day. Remember, there's the difference between scheduled performance day and allowable performance day. No earlier than 2 days prior to remove a contingency removal or meet an obligation, whether it's delivery or deposit or give us our signed disclosures back, that sort of a thing. So notices to perform can be delivered for not just contingency removals. If the notice to perform is written or delivered incorrectly, it's deemed invalid and void, and you have to send a new version. So it's really important to get these specifics correct. And it's very confusing. So I recommend you look it over carefully, you plot out these days and times, and don't make any assumptions on them. Now, the demand to close, which we said is really just for the actual closing date, has its own specific form. And same thing, except this is a 3-day window. So you have to give the other party at least 3 days after delivery to close escrow, and it can't be delivered any earlier than 3 days prior to this scheduled performance day for close of escrow. And of course, if it's written or delivered incorrectly, it's invalid and void, and you have to resend it. Okay, so now that we've seen those definitions, let's see it in action. So here we have a quick 10-day escrow. Again, 5 days to remove all contingencies. We accepted, we have acceptance on the 8th. So if we're counting out 10 days after acceptance, that means the scheduled performance day for close of escrow falls on Saturday the 18th. This is important to remember which one is the scheduled performance day. Now the contract allows that date to get moved to Monday the 20th. But let's say we want to make sure the buyer actually closes escrow on the 20th. So when can we deliver the demand to close? In this case, we have to give the buyer at least 3 days after delivery to close, and we can't deliver it any earlier than 3 days prior to the scheduled performance day. So in this case, that would be the 18th. So now we take the scheduled performance day and we count back 3 days prior to the 18th. So that means we can deliver this demand to close on the 15th for an escrow that's scheduled or being allowed to close on the 20th. And then furthermore, if we run it forward, right, knowing we have to give at least 3 days after we deliver this demand to close for the actual closing to take place, delivery on the 15th means now day 1 is that Thursday. On the 16th, day 2 is the 17th, and then they have until 11:59 p.m. on the 18th to perform. Well, now we're talking about because they can't perform on a weekend or a holiday, this now moves that requirement to the 20th. Does this make sense? It's very specific and very confusing, and it's important as well because this has to do with canceling a whole escrow. I genuinely don't know. You just have to look at it over and over again and do it over and over again to really get comfortable with it. So keep in mind that there are these two differences. So you might say, oh, I have to deliver this, demand to close. I have to give them 3 days. So I'm going to deliver it on Friday because then they have Saturday, Sunday, Monday. That's not actually the case. You can deliver it as early as Wednesday. Okay.
John Kearney says it's clear to him.
Good. I would much rather have you guys do this math than me. So now if we're talking about the due date for the full contingency removal, that is based, the date here for full CR 5 days after acceptance lands on a Monday. That's the scheduled performance day. And for the notice to perform, we can't deliver that any earlier than 2 days prior to this scheduled performance day, which means the notice to perform needs to be delivered on a Saturday. If it's delivered on Friday, then that's 3 days prior to Monday. And if you deliver it in the wrong timeframes, it's considered void. So because the buyer has until 11:59 p.m. on Monday, they get that full day to perform as well. So if it's delivered on Saturday, then they have all day on Sunday, and they have all day until 11:59 p.m. on Monday to remove that contingency. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And Joyce says, that's why she says, I have to say, this is why you use a TC. Yes. Cheryl Peterson says, amen.
I feel like if we could just get like really specific in the contract, or when you're countering, like, this is the due date, and just make them all Fridays, so then we can deliver them sometime during the week and we don't have to worry about weekends and holidays and jumping around. But
I know, right?
there's always going to be an exception and something different there. So so hopefully your brains aren't melted too much, but again, just a recap, the tentative release date for this new purchase agreement is they're trying to do it the second week of December. You'll just see it. You'll go to open up a purchase agreement, or you'll receive an offer, and it will look like this. They'll roll it out. They don't have a specific day, sometime in December. Not just the contract is being changed. The contract obviously has the biggest change, but there are 63 ancillary forms that are mentioned in the RPA. So all of those are getting updated and tweaked. 2 forms or 2 purchase agreements are being discontinued. Again, we touched on this in the first webinar, but the probate purchase agreement and the mobile home manufactured home purchase agreement are being discontinued. And we'll touch on the next webinar about addendums and advisories, how those scenarios are being executed now without their own specific purchase agreement. 7 of the other purchase agreements are being conformed to follow these same changes, because there are still other purchase agreements. The vacant land purchase agreement, there's, I can't even remember off the top of my head all the other ones. Income property purchase agreement, all that kind of stuff. And then they're doing 7 forms are going to be new or just renamed. And again, on CAR.org, you can see what their plan is. You can now even view what some of those forms are going to look like if you navigate to that section on CAR.org. And then again, we have 2 more webinars planned, not next week because it's Thanksgiving week. And but we're also going to be touching again on addendums and advisories, and then cancellations, tenants, kind of the other fine print, all that other stuff that may or may not happen in your contract, and sort of the fine print that you want to be aware of. But other than that, that's it for me today, and I came in under an hour.
Nice
So,
work.
more cause for celebration. I may have fried everybody's brain in less than an hour, but
Hey, it was time well spent.
so that's it for me.
You know, a super quick question from
Yeah.
an anonymous attendee.
Okay.
The question is NTP
Yeah.
then a reminder? Why send NTP if buyer was planning on sending CRs on time? How do you know it's going to be late?
You don't. Sometimes
Yeah.
as the agent, let's say you have, so because you have to give 2 days, if you wait until that contingency removal is late, then you're kicking out an additional 2 days before you can possibly cancel. So sometimes the scenario will be the listing agent has a better offer waiting in the wings, and they're just waiting for the buyer so that they can cancel with this buyer and take the offer with the higher purchase price or something like that. So they want to make sure that the buyer is super sticking to their timeframes. And if they don't remove it by the end of that day, then they can cancel. Let's say they don't remove it by 11:59 p.m. on Monday, then on Tuesday, the seller can sign the cancellation and be done. Otherwise, if they wait and then on Tuesday, they're like, oh, we didn't get the contingency removal. Now we have to issue a notice to perform. Now we have to issue that performance on a Tuesday, which gives them until Wednesday, until 11:59 p.m. on Thursday as the end of day 2, which means now you can't cancel until Friday. So it's kind of a way of keeping everybody in check. But it's one of those things where it really depends. It's sort of a divisive tool. Some agents don't like it. They consider it offensive, or, if you send it as, in advance, it's kind of like, I haven't even done anything. Why are you sending this? I can't send this to my buyer. And everybody gets really sensitive. And then others throw it around like confetti. So just kind of depends. It's a tool at your disposal, and the terms in the contract really dictate how you're able to navigate those terms and make it work for you, or be prepared that it could potentially work against you.
Yeah, that's for sure. And then this is an interesting question from Joyce. She says that she's been seeing Zillow listings with additional forms in supplements that are mandatory for acceptance of an offer. And it looks like a whole contract. Has anybody else seen that or had a sale with Zillow?
I hate Zillow. Okay.
I think we all do. That's pretty, that's mutual.
Right. This could be its own whole side webinar, but really the important thing to note for those forms and to advise your buyer about, they send out this addendum, which you have to sign in order to get, everything accepted. It really obviously is going to benefit Zillow. So it has terms in those addendums that they can just passively remove contingency removals, and they what else? It's a passive inspection contingency removal. The buyer waives their right in this stupid addendum. They waive their right to the TDS or the SPQ. So these, which I don't even understand how that's possible, because California law says you can't, and then both parties are agreeing you can't. I don't even know. That's probably part of the reason why they're a mess. But
yeah, they have more lawyers than everybody else.
The other thing in relation to this on that addendum is in regards to the notice to perform. So the seller can cancel escrow without ever issuing this demand to close. So it modifies these terms for delivery of notice to performs and demand to close. If you don't get Zillow to sign off on an extension, if you know that you're going to be late in closing or in contingency removal, and if you don't get them to sign an extension within that time frame, then the seller can just unilaterally cancel and you're done. They don't have to send you a notice or a demand to close. And then if this, on the other hand, if Zillow doesn't perform and you want to send them a notice to perform, there's no consequences for that. If they're in breach of contract, all the buyer can do is just cancel and get their deposit back. They can't issue a notice to perform or look for any of those liquidated damages or monetary damages. So it's really stupid. Don't do it. But there, again, it's a whole separate webinar, and I really hope we don't see more of it, but it is something to be careful of and read those addendums really carefully, because it is an addendum and it does modify the contract. It's not just an advisory.
Right. And the good news is Zillow is going away on the future deals, right?
Yeah, but you cut off one head and two more
Exactly.
parts. Somebody else is going to try it, in some other way. So
You're absolutely right.
be aware.
Yes. And the consensus in the chat is everybody hates Zillow.
My
I won't go into details, but yeah, no. Zillow, yuck.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, really appreciate your time again today, Lauren. This has just been an amazing series, and we look forward to the next 2 installments as well. So you're right. So next week we'll have a webinar, a quick webinar, a marketing webinar, but it won't be a continuation of the series. And then we'll be coming back the following week with the 4th installment, right?
Yes, that is the plan.
All right, perfect.
Yeah. So
All right, great. Well, again, this is all of Lauren's information. And we always put her, well, don't worry, because we always put it out on the replay. And so all of Lauren's information will be there. If you have questions and you want to use her services, of course, she's the owner operator of TC Advantage, and we recommend her highly. All right, great. So Bill, unless you have any final words for us.
No, I don't. I always like going through this stuff. It's actually pretty interesting. And it's just a good refresher always. Can never look at this stuff too much.
No, for sure. We have to be the experts on this stuff. So the more you're an expert on these contracts, the more you are an asset to your clients and to your sphere of influence. So just, continue to learn this stuff, fill the thing out many times before you actually have to do one for real. So that's really, I think, an important thing that everybody should do.
Yeah. And that's something to I highly recommend. If you don't, I recommend you take the class through CAR. You have the opportunity to ask CAR Legal during those classes, some of these questions and things that pop up. But really just keep in mind that the contract has been created and formulated. This was supposed to roll out December of last year. And so I really, as much as it's like, this sucks, it's happening now, it would have been way worse last year. So
totally,
it's really been formulated to be neutral. So there are tools and terms in the contract that can benefit or go against either buyer or seller. And so it's really important as an agent to know what those tools are at your disposal. So
that's a fact. All right, guys. Lauren, again, thanks for being on the webinar, and agents, thanks for joining us. And we will see you guys next week on the webinar. Get out there, make it a productive week and a great week. And we'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.